You're listening to Nonpartisan Hacks, the politics and policy podcast where we talk about good government from the local level on up. I'm Joel Grenz, a City of Parksville councillor.
And I'm Sean Wood, also a Parksville councillor. Today we're sitting down with someone who's no stranger to those who follow politics in British Columbia.
That's right. Our guest is Adam Olsen, who served on Central Saanich Council before being elected to the BC Legislature in 2017, where he was part of the BC Green Caucus until 2024.
Adam's a member of the Tartslip First Nation with a strong voice on reconciliation, Indigenous rights, and environmental issues during his time in the legislature. Now he's moved on to consulting work.
With the recent court rulings shaking up how we think about Indigenous consultation, and Adam having just come through 7 years in provincial politics, we thought this was the perfect time to get his perspective on all of it.
Before we dig in, a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions we share on this podcast are our own and don't represent the official position of the City of Parksville or anyone else's council for that matter. If we say something brilliant, that's all us. If we say something questionable, well, that's also all us.
Listeners of our show will know that guests normally get bread, and unfortunately, so that would be Sean's famous salted crust fresh baked bread. I do want to apologize that since we don't have a portable oven for Sean, unfortunately no bread today.
Okay, well, you brought jams.
I did bring jam.
And I've provided the salmon. So we're well gifted.
I think
right?
we're set. Yeah,
We did
I
get
think
some
we did some
amazing
gifts.
wild salmon, and we also have a couple of delicious coffees in front of us.
Yes,
too.
I very much appreciate the coffee. It is currently 9 in the morning, and Sean and I took the ferry from across here to Brentwood Bay for the first time, and that was a great little trip of Vancouver Island thing I've never done before.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure, Adam, you've had that ferry quite a few times.
It's the most beautiful little shortcut or something. I think the BC ferries have coined it. We used to jump off of the ferry dock when the ferry was on its way over to Mill Bay and on its way back. We used to use that time as to jump and dive into the ocean there. When I was a kid, we used to fish on the docks around there. And then my dad had a guide fishing boat at Brentwood Bay. Brentwood Bay. It's now Brentwood Bay Lodge. It used to be the Brentwood Inn. So I spent a lot of time down there. We didn't really take the ferry that often. I think if you time it out, you can drive around in almost the same amount of time. And if you have to wait, then you're just waiting. It is nice, though.
That was fun. I never done that before. I've always seen there's a ferry there, and if I've gone around on the car. So that was fun.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to talk about a bunch of things today, but I think maybe just to start off with, let's take a little bit of the journey with Adam Olsen here. We're both in local government, and you made the jump to provincial government. So for our purposes, we're very much interested in both the jump, but also the learnings from local government that you take along with you to provincial government, sort of a compare and contrast. What was your experience going from the local side to the provincial side?
It's interesting. What just came into my mind was the jump from local government to the provincial government was largely related to the fact that the provincial government's conditional grants that they provided local governments were an unsustainable way to fund municipalities.
Oh, we love to hear this.
Yeah,
we love to
this
keep
is
it
like
going.
this. Yeah, this is.
So
just,
I was like, the place you have to fix that is in the provincial government because they are the ones that control that. We're going to get into the conversation about First Nations. Interestingly enough, it's the same system that funds First Nations governments that is funding part of the municipal governments, and it's the difference in the two systems that actually I think is the opportunity when it comes to part of the opportunity when it comes to First Nations. But I decided to run in 2013 because I learned very quickly as a municipal councillor that the system that funds local governments and all of the infrastructure and all of the programs and services that are delivered by a local government is unsustainable the way that it's funded, and it's largely serves provincial politicians for ribbon cutting and back patting, the self back patting that goes on from the provincial government. Look at how good we are. Look at these programs we funded, and ultimately it comes down to the same situation that municipal council finds, that a First Nations council finds, and that is you have to wait for some Crown government ministry to make the same decision about your priority that you've already made.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Little anecdote on the ribbon cutting thing is that I think you would have still been around. Yeah, when the provincial government gave their $1 billion to local governments, part of the community building, well, I forget what that one was called.
A different one.
Growing Communities Fund. And one of the stipulations for how you use the money that was provided to you was that basically that it was like ribbon cutting friendly things that you would be doing with the money.
That's right. And I said to the provincial government at the time, this would be a good program if you made it for 10 years. Mm-hmm. This is a bad program if you make it for 1 year. I supported the 1 year, but I said, look, like this should be a sustainable funding pot in which the provincial government redistributes money that it collects from the people of BC and from the businesses and from all of the ways that provincial government collects money. And it redistributes it to local governments to be able to do the projects that they've already prioritized. Yeah. And this has got to be the most frustrating thing, is to sit down, go through the process, do the strategic planning, work on it, and then have to wait for somebody else to agree with your priority. And these are things that, in my experience at local government, my experience now working in First Nations, the projects that we're building, the programs that we want to fund are all contributing to the economy of the region and of the local area. And they're all a benefit. And they invest in local trades, they build local skills, and in the end, they become spaces for community to grow from. And so, the current system is upside down, really. And I noticed that as a local government politician, and then got elected to the provincial government, and was told very early on, Adam, we're not changing this. And I was like, well, that's not surprising to me, but there's no political will in Victoria to change it. Mm-hmm. There's no political will in Victoria to make the substantive updates to the Local Government Act that need to be made. The changing things around the edges to make municipalities do things that the province wants to do, they've got time for that. But the substantive changes to make sure that local governments and communities are adequately funded, there's no political will for that.
Yeah, and UBCM and FCM, they're always talking about this. You can't do sustainable planning with kind of one-off, grants that might last for a year. How are you supposed to do that? Like, imagine if all of people's jobs were only for 1 year contracts or something. Well, people plan for farther out than that, even in their home budgets, let alone with a regional district or a city or a municipality.
Well, take childcare for an example. This is similar for a local government as it is for a First Nations government. The provincial government since 2017 has changed that and evolved that program. First, they were funding everything, so communities go and start to plan for childcare in the communities, and then the provincial government changes its mind, and now you've got a bunch of projects that are designed, ready to go for a program that doesn't exist anymore, because the provincial government, the Ministry of Education and Childcare, are off chasing some other shiny object somewhere else. And
flavor of the day.
That's right. And so that work, that investment in designing, going to the community, asking what the needs are, asking for people to provide their input on how they would see programming, play out in that technical space. All that work is what's wasted now because it's just sitting there waiting for a program that doesn't exist anymore.
And the other tool that you had on Saanich Council was property taxes. That was your other funding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, the revenue that's generated from the value of the land in the community, or in the land within the letters patent boundaries that created that municipality.
Right.
So you mentioned shiny objects. If you look at the speaking, I've got a shiny object right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Being in local government, I've noticed that we tend to, like you mentioned, plan out in advance. We have a 5-year financial plan. Things are looking into the future quite a bit. My preference for how I like to see government generally is that it's kind of like the NHL head office, where they're setting out the rules of the game. They create basically formulate what the players on the ice are going to be doing. So the players on the ice being our communities, our businesses, the economy, all that sort of thing. But you're not down on the ice with your stick. You're up there setting the rules for the game, making sure that there's fair play, making sure that it's an interesting game that people are going to want to watch and all that. But and I feel like that's what happens in local government. But my observations lately seems like the provincial government is far more reactive and far more distracted by whatever is coming along, as opposed to having sort of that longer view of how we create the playing conditions just generally, as opposed to jumping in all the time with our stick on the ice.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the level, the government, doesn't matter whether it's a local government, provincial government, federal government, First Nations government, have to get on the ice. So they're, and we can talk about the philosophical differences that we may or may not have on when that level of government needs to hit the ice. Get
in the game.
That's right. I just want to say that at the outset of this answer is that sometimes I believe that it is appropriate for the government to hit the ice. However, I think that generally the provincial government also doesn't do long-term planning very well because because of the politics. So this is where politics and the administration, the administration of government and the politics of government don't align very well because we get on these 4-year election cycles and
at the most 4-year.
Yeah,
maybe that's
sometimes 2, sometimes next week, right? Or when that's a really so there's a whole other shiny object that we could chase. So let's just say it's supposed to be 4. Generally, like we should live with what we've got for 4, or try to make it work. And we see some of that happening federally right now. Is that they're trying to make the people that got elected are trying to make it work, and sometimes that does include shift, as we can see in BC, shifting the seats around a little bit and reorganizing with what you have. But the idea of just 4-year cycle, the idea of and now the reward of a majority government, potentially tempting politicians to go early so that they can try to get a majority government, which will then give them 4 years.
Pull a Doug forward.
Which is still not long enough to do long-term planning. And
or John Horgan.
So you work very much. Yes, John Horgan. I remember that one.
I'll bet you.
Yeah, you would definitely remember that one.
I remember that one. So it makes it challenging. It makes it challenging to do the long-term planning. However, it is when politicians get seized with the politics and distracted by that, that then they throw out their actual responsibility is to govern.
Yeah. You get elected. Government. You're a politician who gets elected to be in government.
That's right.
So at some point in that equation, there's governing that should be happening, I would think.
Well, there's lots of politicking.
Yeah.
And this is something that perhaps technology has played a big role in. We didn't know everything about everybody before, right? And politics was slow. In terms of information moving around and information getting from one person to another. News cycle was a lot longer. Now we have so much information. We know everything about what everybody's thinking because they just tweeted it or they or X'd it or they just posted it on Facebook. So you know what they're thinking, or they did. They've, like, I often felt like this need to go and do a little 1-minute video about what I felt about something. And it was largely because I felt like this need to produce some content. Produce something.
You're a content producer.
I got to be part of the news cycle here. I got to make sure that
I'm a content creator. I'm not a government.
I want to let people know how outraged I am about the current situation that we're facing. So that whole scenario the technology has had an impact on how things have sped up. And I got elected in 2008. Just as Twitter and Facebook were being created and shaping and forming.
You had a MySpace, I guess, at that point?
I had no, I did not. But I did go through, I got so fed up with the mainstream social media about halfway through my political career that I went back and retroactively created a MySpace. I think there is a MySpace
Still friends with Tom, I hope.
Just sitting there.
Tom from MySpace.
Yeah, that's right. So I created one several years later because I was being rebellious and feeling like, you know what, I'm going to go back.
Yeah,
I'm taking all my people to MySpace. And then I got off
my album too while you're there.
Then I left Twitter, so.
Well, so, I mean, shiny objects, the role of the government, politics to governing, these are all dynamics that we're dealing with. What is the public service side of things in your interactions with the machinery of government that is the public service? I would hope that they're less political. I would hope that they're less easily sort of steered in random directions all the time. How does that look? I don't have any window into that in local government. I do at our staff level that we work with, and they are very even keel and very steady Eddie with the ship, but I don't know how it works in the provincial staffing side. And what did you encounter there?
Well, like a true politician, I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask about public service. And I think that it is, I just want to end the answer of the last question, which is ultimately when we get elected, we are getting elected to serve the public. Mm-hmm. And so the shiny object that I just chased with we lose as politicians the service to the public. We get in service of, this is called nonpartisan hacks. We get in service of the political party that we get elected under. And we start to serve their interests, and start to serve the broader interests of the conservative movement or the progressive movement,
right?
Whatever it is, you get caught up in serving the broader interests of that. It
becomes part of the job.
And I think one of the things that I confronted in 2024 was that there was one topic matter that was really important to me, and it was going to be very difficult to continue to serve the public by being the voice of this one issue, and perhaps at the expense of the other issues. Mm. And so in order for me to serve the public, I needed to not be in that role anymore. And that was just one aspect of me deciding to retire from politics, was that I realized that this issue that we're going to get to here around reconciliation and the relationship between Indigenous people and Crown governments and the rest of the population in our country and in our province it's in me. Mm-hmm. It's my parts, right? And I felt like I needed to be focused on that. So that's public service. I think everybody that gets elected needs to recognize that and to acknowledge and embrace as their key motivating force that they're there to serve the public broadly. That's a lot of different people.
Yes.
That's a lot of variety and diversity and of thought and of background and of all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you really have to respect that is the public that you get elected to represent.
Very broad scope.
Bunch of differences of opinion. I remember saying in one speech I did that I represent 50,000 different opinions. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's a daunting task, and it's a sobering task when you think about it that way. And it's much easier to just serve the party that you get elected to, or serve yourself in that role. Mm-hmm. So I think
that's the easier one then.
Oh, it's super easy.
Yeah, just toe the party line. Say the things people expect you to say from insert,
or that they hand to you.
Yeah, or that they hand to you. Yeah. If we take sort of let's do this transition here. So kind of the hero's journey for Adam Olsen. You went into the government, you went into the politics thing. That was your quest there, maybe slayed some dragons or whatever. And then you come back, leaving that, you come back to your community in a new way with new knowledge and new insight that you can now bring to the community to serve it better. What is that stage now? What did you get from being in elected roles that you can now take forward to the community?
Experience about the public service. I'm going to get back to that. I think we need to get back to that because it's a very important component of it. As you've noted, it's a very important component of your relationship to your municipality as city councilors, your public service. I brought back to my community a bunch of experience and a lot of relationships.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And, the relationships are as critical and as key as the experience. That requires staying current, right?
Sure.
So making sure that constantly focused on building those relationships with people across the political spectrum from a variety of different backgrounds, just relating to people. And that was ultimately what the job of politics, or the job in politics, my role in public service taught me, was that you embrace the public, and all of the people in those bureaucrat jobs or government jobs, they're all people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so finding ways to relate to them and relate with them was probably the biggest gift that politics, my work in politics taught me.
Yep.
And when people came through our door at the constituency office, for me, it was always a challenge to understand better what people wanted to bring into that, what they were bringing into that office, was to test them. And, a lot of the conversations that we had were kind of like an interview like this, where people would come in and I just ask questions to probe and learn more about what it was that they were bringing into the office. And how, the more I understood about that, the better I was going to be able to serve them. Of course. And to serve our community. And so that was the approach that I took. The public service, people choose to work in the public service when they could work in private business or private entities and maybe even make a higher wage there. But they choose it, I think, the same as the politicians. I think people choose to work in the public service. Why I'm choosing to work in Sartlip is because of my desire to serve my community. And I went from being on the forward-facing, the public-facing side of public service to now the back end of public service, which is it's not an elected role. It's there to serve the elected people, to provide them the best information and the best advice, to give them the best access to the relationships that I've been able to build over the years, and the experience that I've got from those relationships, and to serve the public. So, in the end, I think that they're just two sides of a very important coin. They're all part of the same coin. And ultimately, the choice to run for public office, same thing could be said for the people who are in those leadership roles. You're working in the public sector or private sector could probably be doing better financially than being an elected official. But people make that choice to serve the public. I believe.
That's what I think generally seen. All the people that we encounter, I feel like in the local government, we've been to various UBCMs and FCMs and committees and all that sort of thing. So many people there are there to serve their communities. They're not there to make some big political fuss about something. They just want to do good government. And that's definitely
and to Adam's point, he was representing 50,000 people, 50,000 opinions. A lot of those people that we chat with at UBCM or FCM, they're trying to find solutions for that many opinions as well. And it's not an easy task because you really can't please all 50,000 opinions at the same time, but you can try to get the broadest brush to solve the most problems you can with a solution instead of just choose a little bit of people.
And that's why when certain public policy areas start to elevate and become more the focus. And in my role with the BC Greens, when I was with the BC Greens, I had half of the ministries that I was the critic for, right? And so in that situation, it became untenable for me to be continuing to just focus and work on Indigenous rights issues or whatever, right? There was a whole bunch of other issues that we were responsible. And frankly, some of those issues, we were the only ones that are talking about it. There is only a discussion about old growth in BC legislature because Sonia and I were insistent that we were going to have that conversation there. Yeah. And the Greens have continued that on. So that is a role that we played, and it's an important role that the BC Green Caucus continues to play. And when so I think that there are spaces and there are seats at the other tables that you can choose to sit at. And this is ultimately for me, which was the most freeing moment for me, was when I realized, I could sit at any one of those seats. I don't need to sit in this seat with this title. I could sit in that seat with that title or that seat with that title.
Of course.
Right. And job description. And it was at that moment that I realized I don't need to abandon the table. I just need to stand up and go and take a different seat at it.
Yeah. Adam, one of the reasons we're here today is because, I met you during the 2019 federal election. I met you at, I think it was at a campaign event, maybe for yourself. It was up in Courtenay, I think, and met you for the first time. And we've chatted various times ever since, but I heard you on CKNW the other morning, and I just texted you after I heard you live, and I'm like, hey, that was really great. I'd love to chat with you sometime. And you called me right back, and we had a really good conversation while I was standing in my driveway after I was done my morning jog listening to CKNW. And And we talked about the Cowichan Tribes decision, and you and I were chatting about how it feels like it's a very binary system where, this group wins, this group loses, and how that system, it doesn't really leave room for everybody moving together in a bit of a partnership. And I really would like to see some tangible ways how everybody could move together as a partnership. And we know that the province has been dropping the ball and should have negotiated a long time ago, but here's where we are. And so that's my, long-winded segue to, hand it off to you, starting with wherever you think we should start with on this one.
I think the best way to describe the history of this province is that the provincial government has chosen to exclude First Nations from vast parts of the economy, the economy directly around their communities. And this is where maybe we'll come back to my experience in local government, your experience in local government, and that exclusion has come at there's huge consequences for that we experience here in First Nations communities. And so the decision to exclude was made because basically the forefathers or the first politicians in the first representatives of the Crown decided that they weren't going to follow their own rules.
Moody, for instance, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, is one name of a bunch of people that decided that it was too expensive, too big of a project to solve the land question of title the way that the Crown told them to, which was be honorable, purchase or secure by treaty those lands. Then feel free to subdivide and sell and do all those things. And in most of the country, that happened to some extent. And I'm not an expert in most of the rest of the country, but there's treaties as you come right across the prairies to even into British Columbia, northeastern British Columbia. However, for the rest of British Columbia, we were a colony in the British Empire at a time when we were the last colony, I think, right? And the gold rush was happening. The gold rush was as much about chasing shiny objects in rivers,
literal shiny objects,
expensive, with a huge amount of value, shiny objects, as it was about a land rush, which was also, a big part of the story of the North American continent was that a lot of people that didn't have land in Europe were now in the New World, so-called New World here in North America, getting access to abundant land and just unbelievable, just an expanse of land that nobody could really understand. And so for the vast majority of Canada, they followed the Crown's directive, the law, the rule of law was to settle it by treaty or by purchase. And so that happened, and in British Columbia it did not. And in some cases, as we see with the Cowichan Tribes case, a piece of land that was supposed to become an Indian reserve was surreptitiously, as it said in the decision, sold to the guy who was supposed to allocate it to the First Nations, right? And so when you start to apply those kinds of stories or start to look at British Columbia through the lens of those stories, you realize, and you talk to First Nations leaders, there's that story multiplied by a couple of times maybe in every community across the province where the Indian agent or the person in charge was supposed to do one thing and they did another, because the whole mindset here for those European settlers that were coming here at that time was to get access to the land, and they had a certain very low opinion of First Nations people, of Indigenous people at that time, and that led them to believe that they could do as they wanted. That's not to say that there weren't people in this province that understood the consequences of it.
For sure.
Jody Wilson-Raybould in her latest book and Roshan Danesh in their latest book, Reconciling History, there's this one quote in there that jumped right out. There's lots of quotes in there, but there was one quote that jumped right out at me, and it was from someone writing to the Times in the UK in the 1870s. That was like, this is a curiosity for the rest of the country. We've settled it through through purchasing the land. But nobody can understand how much that's going to cost here in British Columbia, and we don't know how. We're hoping that I think the comment was, we're hoping that the commissioners adjust it so it won't be so, right?
It's a little bit of a deal there,
yeah, right. And then it didn't happen, and so from that point forward, the people who have run this province have known that this is an issue, and that this big question about title. And where title lies and how it's shared or how it exists or how it exists between the Crown and Indigenous people has lingered over this province, or under the surface in this province since the beginning. And so when the judge comes out and says the provincial land management system is in question because the provincial government has been acting in this way, and that the courts have been saying since Delgamuukw almost directly, you guys don't want to be bringing these to the courts and asking us to rule on these. You need to be finding a way, another instrument that then can solve this and reconcile this on behalf of everybody that lives here now. This is what British Columbia is, exactly what you see. And this is how it's going to be. And so now we have to figure out how we can reconcile that history. I'll just end it with this. Or I'll just end this part of this conversation with this. I'll just say, who other British Columbians would have this legal question hanging over them and not want it answered? And this is the thing that I think is that all British Columbians really need to look at ourselves and say, if this was our story, if this was our family's story, that we've been dispossessed from this place and we've been impoverished as a result of it, that we wouldn't want to seek the justice for our family to make sure that it's, and that ultimately is what pulled me out of the legislature, was because I feel this very strong and passionate feeling to finding the justice for First Nations people. I want to frame that, for finding justice for this history, and to being a contributor, one of many First Nations people that are. I didn't want to frame it like I'm going to go solve this problem, but I want to be a part of the solution. And I felt like being outside the legislature was going to afford me the time and space to be able to work through it.
I think which speaks to the chair. Sorry, that you want to rotate to the other chair on the conversation.
Exactly.
One thing we said, I think, when you and I chatted on the phone, Adam, was that when you go to the courts with these issues, it's almost like a lose-lose for everyone who goes into those proceedings, and that's why the courts are saying, hey, don't bring it to us. You guys need to negotiate. And from a local government level, I look at it as, some people are running and hey, let's do a 0% property tax increase, which Joel and I don't want to do that, because we know that you're just kicking the can down the road. Those assets you want to manage, whether they're, lines under the ground that deliver water or sewer, you're kicking the can down the road instead of dealing with it with your proper property tax increases to pay for assets. That's the responsible way to do it. And it sounds like the province here in BC has kicked the can down the road instead of dealing with it. And when you do that, it just makes the problem worse.
Yeah, back to the 4-year cycles, or the hopefully 4-year cycles, at the most 4-year cycles. Because as a politician, you've only got so many of those, right? And I think that as, premiers, there's a number of decades in which politicians weren't even thinking about this. But since about the 1990s, late 80s, early 1990s, after the Constitution, right? There was supposed to be a discussion as to how we were going to deal with Section 35. And that never happened.
Kick it down the road.
Yep. Somebody else will deal with it. And now this is squarely landed at the feet of David Eby as that politician that at some point in the future was going to have to deal with it. Now it's him. And how he chooses to move in this, it's very easy to move in the same way that the political ancestors and the predecessors moved. But it's a different scenario that he's facing now with Cowichan Tribes' decision, and with the other title cases, which are most certainly going to be now. If the provincial government indicates that the courts are going to be where this gets done, largely through their negotiation tables going nowhere. When we sit at a negotiation, I said to the provincial government, I don't want to go to court. I want to negotiate this. Let's fund this table properly. Let's work towards self-determination, both together as the outcome and the goal of this. Let's work quickly. Let's work smartly and efficiently, and let's get to it. There's no need that this needs to take 10 years. There's no need that this needs to take 7 years. It could take 5 years to do it. But as long as I know that I'm on a path to that and that we're both seized with that as the end goal, then I'm going to be focused on that. But if those tables are not funded, and if it's not taken seriously, then litigation is the way that First Nations have to go in order to get, in order to get that justice that they're looking for.
Another thing we talked about on the phone, Adam, was tangible ways that that First Nations can feel like they're actually partners of, say, my property value going up. Right now, there's no partnership there. It's kind of a binary system where my property goes up, but the people who were here originally, they're not a partner at all, and the province isn't working with them. So we go to court in this binary system where one person maybe wins a little bit and the other person loses. We talked about, say, property transfer tax, which nobody really likes that property transfer tax, but it's a bunch of money that goes into the province that they don't want to split up with anyone else. Is that part of a possible tangible solution if the province were to give First Nations a chunk of that property transfer tax, where First Nations are happy that land values are going up and they feel like they're given some sustainable financing, that they are in partnership with all of the properties going up? Is that part of the solution? What are some kind of tangible ways that we could move the ball forward, even if the province doesn't want to touch it? What would work for everybody here as we try to move forward together?
First Nations have never benefited from the increased value of the land, of their territory. Not from, I remember doing a speech in the legislature where I said, this was one title. Vancouver Island was one title. After the Oregon Treaty, the Crown gave the Hudson's Bay Company 10 years to colonize Vancouver Island. It was one title. And ever since then, we've been fracking land. The Greens love this analogy because it's like the same way that we frack land to remove fossil fuels from it, we frack land to produce real estate wealth as well. And with every fracture comes more wealth is unleashed, more brand new wealth, actually. Like it's we create it. Every time you at the local government subdivide or rezone a piece of property and increase the density of it, you've just made something that didn't exist before, right? First Nations have never benefited from that. The system that has been structured for First Nations has been tightly managed based on a series of grants, like a core grant to operate some of the core functions of government. That's never enough to do the proper job, and then on top of that, it's a pile, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 4 dozen, depending on the size of the community, of funding grants that are annual or 3 years, but that end.
Yeah, so long term.
Really, really hyper short term, similar to what local governments get through grants. First Nations, the vast majority of the work is done through those grants that come from different agencies, federal, provincial crowns, and then also other funding sources. When I noted that it's been exclusion has been the history of this province, inclusion then becomes part of the solution, I think. When we have spent the last 175 years talking about this as that binary that you're talking about, that if I'm winning, you're losing, then that's the way people are going to feel unless the government explains, no, actually, that's not the case, or unless somebody can step up and articulate that actually that's not the case. It's not the case that keeping First Nations funded to a level that's far below what they need to keep up their infrastructure, to keep up the housing that they need, to build their childcare facilities, to build our community spaces.
To make them feel like a partner.
To know. Well, it's not even feeling like a partner. It's actually being a partner. We've made a decision in this province that First Nations are not partners. I remember when I was on the Police Act committee, and we were talking about community policing and how First Nations should be given the ability to choose what police force they want. If we wanted to be policed by the Central Saanich Municipal Police Service, we should be able to take our funding and build a relationship with them and be policed by them. We should be able to take our funding and build our own police service if that's what we want. And I remember saying to my colleagues, we will be successful in our society when a local government says, I want to be policed by the First Nations police service that's next door, because that is a reputable police service. They've got great records. They've got amazing service people. And, we want to hire them. Mm-hmm. We have this idea in society where First Nations are not partners. We are like a burden. And part of that is because that's the narrative that was crafted around making sure that we were going to hold off on being able to articulate the rights that we have to the land. Call the questions that are being asked right now about the land management system. So I think we need it's more than just feeling like we are part of. We want to be a part of the community and be able to contribute to it. We want Parksville to look at their local First Nation and say, that's the best partner that we've got right there. We're going to partner with you on building this new civic center, or we're going to partner with you on building the new recreation center, and know that the First Nation next door has access to the same or similar fiscal tools to be able to participate in that and to be a partner in it, and to be able to have revenues that then economic system looks at and say, okay, yeah, you can be, here's the borrowing space that you have to participate or not in that project, right? So
that's what I want to jump on, is the fiscal tools. So what do you see as being the fiscal tools potentially for First Nations? This is something that municipal governments are always, twisting arms of federal and provincial counterparts, is you have all this taxation power at the provincial and federal level that we do not have at municipal level, yet we have all these demands on our infrastructure. The same thing stands for First Nation communities as well. So what kind of fiscal tools could be put in place?
Well, I think they're the similar or the same ones that have been given to local governments, right? What's interesting is that the powers that have been given to local governments were choiced by the province.
You're talking about grant applications, right?
Well, you have property taxes, right? So let me just say, some way to value or to be able to get revenue or resources from the value of the land that's being created. So when a piece of property's value increases, capturing some of that value and saying, like, look, part of this needs to go to fund the improvements that need to support that, right? And that's the way local governments have been. That's why local governments get property taxes, so they can pay for those things. Mm-hmm. The property transfer tax is an interesting one, because it currently is entirely taken to the provincial government, by the provincial government, and then it's $3 billion. It's like way, way high up on the list of revenue sources.
Oh yeah,
reliable revenue.
Up until the carbon tax was taken away.
Right. That's exactly what that was previously very reliable as well. Although with the more choice, as we move away from fossil fuel consumption for vehicles, that number was going to go down.
That was the idea. Yeah,
it wasn't going to go straight to zero.
No,
which is what they made it do. I would just say that if this is actually part of the solution of answering the question of how do we recognize the indigenous title that's in the soil that exists there, the courts have said exists there, that no amounts of appeal are going to get the courts to determine that it's not there. These appeals will change the decisions, but there's no appeal in my view that's going to come to say, oh, actually, no,
there's
other court
no Aboriginal title after all. Oh, sorry, guys.
You were right after all. It was just a certain amount of discomfort in society makes that all go away.
But what is that? Can you, what is Aboriginal title? So we've got the land title system, and it says, you have this... we
have a land management system.
Sure, yeah.
And it's based off of the Crown's assertion of title.
Yeah.
Which exists beyond it, right?
Yeah,
and what their courts are saying is that the indigenous title exists beyond it too. And it rests at the same place that the Crown's assertion of title rests, in the same place there. So the reconciliation is between the Crown and the First Nation. It's not between all of the rights that are created downstream of that, right, in the land management system.
Right.
And this is the reason why with the same kind of irritation that I have with the provincial government, people who have then taken a huge amount of their revenue each year and pay it to a mortgage in order to have that private they should be the same kind of irritated with the provincial government for not sorting this out.
Right.
This is the fundamental question, and it comes down to the courts are finding that Aboriginal title exists beyond that system, and so it's up to the provincial government. This is why they've always said, sit down and negotiate this.
Yeah.
Sort it out. Find mechanisms that work. And I think that actually being able to benefit from those transactions that happen on the land, those transactions that happen on the territorial waters, in the same way that the provincial crown benefits from those, changes the relationship that we have to those spaces, changes the relationship that First Nations have to the decisions that are made on those spaces. We can start to make these decisions together. And I think that what everybody will find is that we have generally the same interests. We want to do well by our families. We want to be able to have food in our bellies. We want to have houses to provide us shelter, and all of those things.
And we want a future of all those things to continue on.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if everyone feels like they're on the defensive, no one really wins. And First Nations have felt like they're on the defensive for, decades. And now we start to see that, private property owners in, say, Richmond, then suddenly they're on the defensive. And so then everybody gets on the defensive, and then it's like a lose-lose if it all goes to the courts.
Yeah, and because the politicians are very sensitive to that, and especially very sensitive to private property owners, they scramble around the political landscape rather than thoughtfully moving, carefully moving, slowly moving. Mm-hmm. I said to the provincial government, there was no need for the provincial government to come out with an aggressive appeal.
Mm-hmm. The very next morning. The
very next morning, where we're fighting for you, we're fighting for your rights, That's what's creating the division. Mm-hmm. I would entirely expect the Attorney General to come out and say, there's some serious questions that need to be answered here. There's some serious questions that we don't think that this BC Supreme Court answered properly or correctly. We think that that this has got a big impact here in British Columbia, but potentially across the country, and we're going to be appealing this. And,
but how does that put points on the board with the people I'm trying to court in the next election?
Yeah, it doesn't. Ultimately, I think that this issue needs to be depoliticized. This is something that I've been saying to the provincial government. You need to take it out of the hands of politicians. You need to take it out of the hand of the opposition parties. You need to find a way to depoliticize this and work through it like I said, in a calm and thoughtful way. And it starts with education. It really, there's a key part of this is really critical, is that the provincial government needs to say, look, there's some parts of this story that we've not been, and the province needs to own up to this. There's parts of the story that haven't been told as clearly as they should.
They could come out the next morning and say this ruling is not a surprise to us, not just this party, but every party before us as a province, as a provincial government, has not done the job that needed to be done. The more we kick the can down the road, the heavier the can is getting. Yep. And what we've been doing is we hand out one-off grants to local governments and one-off grants to First Nations, and that buys us time to the next election cycle. Well, eventually the can gets so heavy that we can't kick it anymore. And that's kind of where we're coming as a province, and it's time to grow up. And this government is going to answer maturely to the ruling that we thought was coming. And I think that's the role of the government, and I think that's why we've been elected, is because we're going to handle this situation as maturely as possible. And yes, we're going to appeal it, but we are also going to fund those negotiations with the unceded territories, and we are going to find a way that we can make everyone a partner moving forward, because going to the courts is not a solution for anybody. Does that sound better than what? Nothing against the Attorney General, but I just did that off the top of my head, but it sounded better to me.
Yeah, it's just calm. It's just acknowledging the fact that we have a very complicated history, and that the reason why we're facing it the way we're facing it today is because there lacked the political will in the past and the belief that it was necessary.
I've heard way more about the appeal in the media and in the discussion than I have heard about the 18-month period that the court laid out to come to some solutions on this. There was an 18-month period that comes out of this case to say, okay, players, get together, sort this stuff out. But instead, we're hearing all about appeals. We're hearing all about people lighting their hair on fire, about whether property rights are a thing and all that. how do we deal with it? I'm really nervous actually about hearing pundits on one of the podcasts that you appear on from time to time saying that we're looking down the barrel of a reconciliation election coming down, and that's not good for anybody. If the ballot question is whether we should reconcile or not, and who's going to take what from whom, this is not seems like a good place to run an election on.
Well, it was one of the key promises of the incoming BC Liberal government in the early 2000s. They asked the question by referendum, and then they proceeded over the next number of years to make significantly different decisions than the ones that inspired them to say, we're going to put a referendum out there about First Nations rights. It doesn't, this is part of the challenge with the politicizing it, is that it doesn't matter what the public thinks about the situation.
It matters their lesson, though. They
that's
got
right.
slapped down in the courts, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, you guys have a point here in courts. Thank you for the suggestion. It is actually better to negotiate. Why should I drag my whole family through a court proceeding around our divorce, or why should I drag my former business partners
That's right.
through a bunch of expensive litigation where we have to argue about every little point and pay a bunch of legal fees when we could just sit down and have an adult conversation?"
That is exactly right, and that's exactly what the courts have been asking them to do since Delgamuukw. Sit down, and the BC treaty process. You know, we got a treaty here in this territory across the water there from our relatives. It's been being negotiated for 35 years. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is the pace of it. Mm-hmm. This is the pace of it, and it's
glacial.
To delay, it's to distract, it's to dissuade, right? And so, you know, I think that. I think that this is part of the reason why I want to just end that thought, because it sounded very callous when I said it doesn't matter what the public thinks. It's not about an emotional response to this. Yep. It's very much about answering legal questions. And you know, our court system, our judicial system is built on precedents. It's built on the decisions. If you read the Cowichan decision, all the way through it is the judge talking about how this connects with the previous decisions that have been made. Does it make new ground? Yes. Does it ask new questions? Does it create new questions that need to be answered? Sure. That's how the system ultimately works here in Canada, and that's not going to change. And so,
nor do we want it to change. That is a good system, folks.
Well,
this is a lot better than the alternative.
but I think that because people are very concerned about I heard one pundit very shortly after the decision that said we need to send this to the Supreme Court and get a different decision. And it was like, that's not how this works. Not how this works, right? And it's sending out a message that, and the aggressive appeal is sending out a message too, that we're going to get a different decision. But think about that, or we're going to get a remarkably different decision. But think about that's just kicking the heavy can a little bit further down the road, probably past the next election, knowing that the appeal is going to take a number of years, right?
Well, the original case took like 5 years, and the decision is like, 4,000 pages or something. Someone has actually thought a little bit about this issue, a little bit more than maybe all the politicians who are going to try to jump on whatever side of this issue to turn it into a political football.
I think the BC NDP were trying to get out and cut the BC Conservatives off before they were able to, seemingly make it a very challenging political issue.
Well, if they want to do that, why don't they, as soon as that comes out, sit down with the BC Conservatives and say, look, this is for the good of our province, for the good of all of our children. Let's actually come to a good situation together on this and not turn this as a weaponized thing where we're using First Nations communities as kind of our foil for either side of the issue. This is where it gets really troubling. Is democracy is great, right. But democracy does also put people who are in a minority into a very awkward position when the majority is kind of making decisions about the minority through voting. So that's right. The downside of a democracy. And here we have a situation where oh well, how convenient, we can use First Nations communities as a political thing and talk about reconciliation industry and all these sorts of stand in front of signs in order to get some social media likes. That is not how you govern.
No, that's the opposite of governing. That is just playing pure politics. And I think a mature, well-functioning government not the specific party in power and the specific party, the entire mature government would have had the leaders of the governing party and the leaders of the opposition party say, okay, you know what? Why don't we approach the Cowichan together as the two leaders, the premier and the leader of the official opposition, maybe include the other leaders of the political parties that want to participate as well, and say, we want to sit, because one of the biggest things is this is secret, it's all secret. And look, so many agreements are negotiated in secret because, you don't do public negotiations like this unless the negotiation is failing. Then you go to the media and start talking about it publicly. But for the most part, sitting down on the details and doing it is done at a table and the doors are closed. But having that conversation together provides certain, I don't know that the Cowichan would have accepted it, but it would have been novel. And it would have completely de-escalated the situation. It would have been an incredible act of leadership on behalf of our premier to say, this is not just a project of this government. If I get kicked out, the next person that comes in is going to have this problem. The next biggest party over here has got just a few less seats than I've got. Let's invite them in. Let's actually take this question out of question period and put it where it belongs, at a serious table where serious answers can be found for the very, very, very big questions, existential questions in this province that every politician before us has failed to answer. We could do that.
If the other leaders don't want to join at the table, well, the invitation has been offered, and if they don't want to be a part of it, that's okay. That's on them. I have offered the invitation because I think that it's a whole government solution. The whole, all the party leaders. It shouldn't be partisan. Let's move the province together. Let's move it together.
That's absolutely right. That's a great answer for the next. You're doing very well in the next debate. Are you running for one of these political parties, or?
I do get asked occasionally.
You did.
I am running for mayor of City Parksville. We're going to take it one step at a time, Adam.
He likes the no party thing and the
So it's interesting that it came back to that, because we all are called nonpartisan hacks, and the party system that we're built on, it is instantly divisive, in my opinion, just by parties, and nothing against BC Greens or federal Greens or BC NDP or Conservative. You're instantly like, well, we're not going to agree on a bunch of things, so we won't even try. Here's different colors. And I think the party system is kind of net negative on the whole thing.
Well, that's a different podcast entirely. What I will say, as someone who's lived in that party system, is that I talked about it a little bit earlier in this conversation, and that is, as soon as you put parties, you immediately start to fragment the actual job, which is public service.
I agree.
Party service becomes a big part of what you're focused on.
I agree.
So in your new role, how are you hoping to move this conversation forward in a positive way, and what do you see the right path forward on reconciliation?
Well,
in 5 words or less.
He's joking there, Adam.
Haida Title Recognition Act 2024.
Oh man, he did it too.
Haida Title Recognition Act 2024.
Pretty good.
He did it in 5 words.
Yeah.
What does that mean? When I sat in the legislature in those final days of my time in there, and I had a chance to watch the Haida Nation Recognition Act Amendment Act is actually Haida Nation Recognition Amendment Act 2024.
I just want
to make sure that I've got the right act. It wasn't about title. It was necessarily in the name. It was recognizing the agreement that they had come to, that they had negotiated, with the threat of a looming lawsuit, being determined by the courts where title was going to be, I think the provincial government and federal government saw the writing on the wall for that one. And it's interesting that the timeline, and I wasn't part of any of these conversations, but if going back, we passed the Declaration Act on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2019, right about the same time as the Cowichan case starts to be heard. And so the provincial government is doing a couple things at once in this transition, which seems confusing and makes it leads to a point where, on one hand, they're saying one thing about Haida and Haida title and the agreement that they made, and on the other hand, they're appealing the Cowichan. It's like, how is the government arguing both positions at the same time? And it's because I think, compassionately, I believe that current BC NDP government was on the right track in 2019 in trying to do as the courts have said and said, create these spaces for negotiation to happen. Unfortunately, the Cowichan case, the negotiation didn't work out, and it ended up going to court. And it was an example of why now we see it, why the resources need to be put behind negotiation. And then we fast forward to 2024, and we're there passing this act that recognizes the agreement between the provincial government, later also the federal government, and the Haida Gwaii. And that to me was the pathway forward. We should be celebrating through acts agreements like this every session. There should be one or two of them that the provincial government are negotiating in good faith with the First Nations, ways to recognize the title, to clarify the title for those people in the territories that we're talking about, to say, look, there is no threat here because the provincial government and the First Nation group have come to an agreement about how these things coexist. How do they coexist? Through agreement, right? It's really messy right now, but let's figure out a way through agreement for these things to coexist. And I looked at it and I thought, if I could sit on that other side of the table, finding a way through negotiation for us to be able to solve this, to clarify those questions for the people who have spent thousands, millions of dollars on property in order to provide spaces for their family and for their business and for their economy and for all those things, then we don't need to be in court doing all this. And I felt hopeful. And I would say that this summer I felt a little hopeless because of the way that the provincial government has handled the Cowichan case. They should be using this. In my opinion, they should be using this as the beacon of what to expect if we continue to go to courts, what not to do. Say, look, we're gonna sit down. We're gonna find unique ways to do this. We're gonna try to depoliticize it by pulling, John Rustad and David Eby in the same room together to say, look, like it's incumbent upon this government to get it right. We've got different opinions about where title might lie and how we deal with it. It's good that they're both in the room together. Let's get Cowichan in there and see what it means for them. Maybe we can find a spot, and perhaps maybe we can also find a model. It's not going to be this, the opposition seized when they said, oh, the Haida title is going to be a model for the rest of the province, right? The model is sitting down together and finding a solution. That's the model. Yeah. It's going to be different for each First Nation. Each culture has got different approaches to how they want to do it. There's probably going to be a lot of similarities, but there's going to be some differences. The model is, for the first time in the history of this province, sitting down and saying, we're going to include. It's going to be inclusionary. We're going to stop excluding to try to provide cover for this system that has very, very questionable legitimacy, if any legitimacy at all. And, I think that the fear-mongering, the threats, the rage baiting, all of that, algorithms and social media and politics, as, the Conservatives are painfully close to toppling this BC NDP government and taking full control of this province and a 100% responsibility for this problem. It doesn't go away if the government changes. The problem remains the same, and that's the reason why it needs to be pulled out of the politics of it and just taken as an issue that we deal with it together as a province.
Yeah, well, I think there are enough political footballs out there that could be tossed around instead of this particular issue. So, let this one kind of work its way in an honorable and constructive way would be definitely a good way to go. I'm kind of reminded of my Christian upbringing, the story of Solomon, when the two women come to Solomon and say, we're both claiming this is our baby. And Solomon says, I have a solution. I'll cut the baby in half. You each get half. Well, that's what happens when you go to court. The court is not going to give you a decision that anyone is happy about. The court is good at maybe identifying what is factual and what past precedent says, but it's not a way to negotiate through differences. The court is not going to help you come to a place where everyone feels like they've got a fair deal. Mm-hmm. And that the only way that can happen is through negotiation.
The courts are the worst place. And when we talk about good governance, the governments that let these decisions go, these go to court, they're the worst place. They start out explaining why the other shouldn't exist.
Right.
right? Like it is so confrontational. I think one of the key differences when you think about the key differences between Tsilhqot'in and the Haida experience, for example, right? The Tsilhqot'in are fighting in court for so many years that and having no idea what the outcome is going to be. It's very, very difficult to plan for the implementation if you get the decision that you want. So you have to the system then has it so you're fighting in confrontation with the government. You've made some very unfortunate arguments about each other, right? There's a lot of statements, that a lot of water that has to pass under the bridge, and then you get the decision title. And now you have to figure out how you're going to implement that, and you have to start from a fractured relationship. The negotiation table is different. You can build a relationship with the people across. And I said, what is the key thing that I learned from it is building relationships. That's not always saying things that they like to hear or saying it in easy ways for them to hear it. It's saying it respectfully and building the relationship with the person that they know they're dealing with a serious person on the other side of the table. And there's not going to be any messing around. In good faith, we're both coming to the table.
And looking for common ground as well. That's part of negotiation always is like, how can we find some common ground to build off of?
Yeah. How can we recognize that this is what exists, and how are we going to be able to mutually benefit from it and be able to mutually take advantage of the amazing things that we have here in this province? And so I think that good governance is always finding ways to sit down at the table and work with the people on the other side, whereas the courts, unfortunately, it's very difficult to implement what they have after. It takes time anyways to build the relationships that were fractured in that confrontational process.
We didn't vote for judges. We didn't vote for juries. We voted for the people who are in government to do their job.
I didn't vote for that guy. No, I'm just
not
kidding.
My team.
I'm just kidding.
Go team, whatever color.
Government's job shouldn't be to depend on courts. Government's job should be to sit down at tables and negotiate.
Yeah, in good faith.
Yeah, in good faith.
Yeah. Yep. And also seeing that there's ways for us to be able to benefit together. This is not about you winning at our expense or us winning at your expense. This is about taking those resources and investing them in our community in the places that they need to be invested. This is where there's so much similarity between local governments and First Nations, is that we want to be able to have the resources to be able to make the investments in our priorities. And I think that when we're doing that together, then local governments and First Nations are going to work really closely together. And provincial governments are going to be able to cut the darn ribbons that they want to cut, because they're going to write it right in their funding of proposals. You have to invite us to this ribbon cutting.
That's an amazing full circle moment. So very well done. It's like a what's that called? A callback or something? Yeah, I don't know the parlance.
That's what we do here on Nonpartisan Hacks. Yeah. Adam, it's thanks so much for joining us. It's been so valuable hearing your perspective on making the jump to provincial politics and what reconciliation actually looks like in practice. Thank you so much for making time with me on the phone the other day and for inviting us down and sitting in your home this morning. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Enjoy the salmon.
Yeah, really, really appreciate that. And the salmon and the good conversation and the insights and the work you're doing previously in your previous roles, and look forward to seeing what you're doing moving forward in this very important issue. For our listeners, you can learn more about Adam's work at adamolsen.ca.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Nonpartisan Hacks. We'd love to hear what you think. If you've got a guest suggestion, a good government story, or a topic idea, drop us a line at nonpartisanhacks.com.
Until next time, take care of yourself and your community.